One of my close friends had a 4.0 GPA and a perfect MCAT score, and even though he had these great statistics, he was not accepted into any medical schools. I'm going to share with you the main mistakes that he made so that you don't have to make them, and also so you can get accepted into medical school with a worse GPA and a worse MCAT score than he had. So let's get right into it. The biggest mistake that my friend made had to do with the schools that he chose to apply to, and it wasn't the case that he applied to too few schools, nor was it the case that he applied to schools that were too selective. The problem was that he applied to too many schools that were out-of-state public medical schools. And he also might have erred on the side of applying to too few schools, but that wasn't really what held him back in my opinion. The problem was that he didn't apply to enough schools that he actually had a good chance of getting into, even with impeccable statistics. So the problem with applying to out-of-state public schools is that they are heavily incentivized by funding by the state to admit a higher rate of residents in that state. They also have some other policies in certain states that require in-state schools to admit students from that state that are residents there. Just to clear up some confusion that I personally had about state residency, if you grew up in one state and then attend college in a different state, you might wonder which state you are resident in. And the answer is you're probably a resident in both states. So if you attend college for 4 years in a state that's different from the state that you attended high school in, you're still going to be a resident in that state, assuming you were a full-time student for those 4 years, and therefore you can apply to in-state public schools in both the state you grew up in and went to high school in, and the state that you went to college in. This is especially true if you are still dependent, and I would say that most students are, which is a good thing. It means that you're going to be able to apply to a wider variety of state public medical schools. The second thing I'll note that can be a deal breaker for medical school acceptance is your extracurriculars. I would say the extracurriculars and the schools you select to apply to are way more important than the minute details of your essays. Your essays are obviously really important. It's important that they tell a good story, but a lot of these medical school advisors just go way into the trenches talking about the exact wording of every little piece of the essay, and while it doesn't hurt to go into the trenches there, what's far more important is to actually look at your school list and make sure it's really good, and also to make sure you have the right extracurriculars. When it comes to extracurriculars, you absolutely have to have shadowing, you absolutely have to have clinical experience, and research is a major plus. I would say it's less important than the other two extracurriculars, but it is really good to have. And the reason that all of these extracurriculars are so important is a little bit different for each of them. But shadowing is really important because they want to see that you have actually been in a hospital setting around a specialty or doctor that you're interested in working with. They want to see the clinical experience because they want to see that you've actually been working in a hospital setting, not necessarily just watching a doctor do their job, but actually doing something in the healthcare field yourself, whether that's drawing blood as a phlebotomist, working as an EMT and taking blood pressure readings and those sorts of things, or maybe being a CNA. Any of these things would fulfill that clinical experience. And then lastly, research is really great because medical schools want to be able to see that you're able to read through scientific literature. This is a really important skill as a doctor because as research comes out, medical schools want to know that you're going to be able to keep up with that information and continue to practice the most up-to-date standards as a doctor. Now, with those two things in mind, you're going to have a good chance of avoiding the pitfalls that my friend had because while he did have great statistics, his extracurriculars were significantly lacking. He had barely any shadowing, and he had a pretty boring clinical experience job. I won't say that being a scribe, hurts your application that much, but the way that he had his structured didn't look very authentic because he only started scribing his senior year, and he just didn't have that many hours working as a scribe. On top of that, being a scribe is sort of the worst clinical experience in my opinion because it's just not very unique. So the fact that he didn't have very much clinical experience, the fact that he started it really late, and the fact that it was a pretty boring choice for clinical experience just all really hurt his application. On top of that, the fact that he chose only really selective schools and only out-of-state public schools made it pretty much impossible that he was going to get accepted unless some miracle happened or he just had perfect stats and somehow it worked out for him. Unfortunately, while he did have perfect stats, he didn't apply to enough schools that actually he had a chance of getting into given the fact that he had terrible extracurriculars and no research. So if you get the extracurriculars down, you pick a list of medical schools that includes public in-state schools and maybe some less selective private institutions, so you're not just applying to like UCSF and Stanford and other very prestigious medical schools. You keep your list a little bit more balanced. You get your extracurriculars. You won't have to worry about this. Don't feel that you can't get into medical school from all these horror stories you hear. Everyone will tell you, this sequence is terrible, this sequence is terrible. I remember when I was getting ready to take organic chemistry, everyone told me I was going to fail the class. Organic chemistry is that weed out class, right? And then it turned out I got all A's in organic chemistry because I was just completely freaked out that I was going to fail the class. The same thing happened with physics. Everyone told me physics was going to be really hard, and I got an A+ in the first term of physics, and then I continued to get A's throughout the entire sequence. So what really matters is your mindset and your mentality. Don't get freaked out by these people. Just use the possibility that you won't succeed as motivation to really put the effort in to succeed. Overall, if you implement these basic things I talked about, you're not going to fall in the same trap as my friend. You're probably going to get accepted with a lower GPA just because of your school selection and your extracurriculars, and possibly your letters of recommendation. So that's all I've got. If you want to see other pre-med content, check out some of my other videos on my channel. That's all I got for you today. If you want to follow me on my journey to becoming a neurosurgeon, you can subscribe also, or like the video, or leave a comment asking a question. All right, that's all I got.